Call to order the Williamsport City Council meeting of Thursday, December 7th, 2017, close to 7:30 p.m. in City Hall chambers. Please rise for the invocation by Councilman Smith and remain standing for the flag salute.
Father God, as we come here this evening to work for the good of our great city, we would ask that you grant us the knowledge, the wisdom, and the desire to do what is in the best interest of our city, and not which is in the best interest in any of us. Father, as we enter the Christmas season, and still in our hearts, peace, not war, love, not hate, giving, not greed, not boastfulness, and most of all, to remember that Jesus is the light of the world, and all things can be accomplished through him. Father, this Christmas, let us all remember our military troops, both here and abroad, who will be away from their families in order to keep us out of harm's way. And Father, we ask your blessing for those who are hurting from health issues, financial issues, family issues, drug abuse issues. Please comfort and guide these folks who are desperately in need of help, especially this time of year, and we need to remember these folks all year long. Father, give us the desire and the initiative to help those in need and help make this Christmas also a joy for them. We ask all of these things in your most precious and holy name. Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Councilman Smith. I just want to announce we're going to move items 5 and 6, the ordinances adopting the budget and the taxing, to the end of the agenda, so we don't, we can handle the other items more quickly and then get to those items, and not put anybody under any undue waiting time. So we have item 3, approval of City Council minutes dated 11/21/17. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any questions or corrections? If not, then Mrs. Frank.
Mr. Novello?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Henderson?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes. And obviously, President Williamson is not able to be here tonight, so I'm standing in his stead. Item 4, limited courtesy of the floor. We've had no requests tonight. 5 and 6, we're dropping down. Item 7, resolution to approve a bill of sale, which has been tabled. Is there a motion to take it off the table? Hearing none, then it remains tabled. Item 8, resolution awarding the City of Williamsport trash removal for 2018. And Mr. Winder.
Good evening, members of council. This resolution is to accept the trash bid for 2018. The bid will be awarded to Bauer Disposal. With your approval, we received 2 bids. One from Fred Ham Incorporated out of Jersey Shore at the amount of $22,979.68. And the other from Bauer Disposal at $22,799.28. It did go before both committees with their approval to bring it to council.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Winder. Public Works and Finance reviewed this. Mr. Smith?
Yes, we reviewed this on Tuesday of this week, and as Adam pointed out, this is brought before us each year, and there was a little bit of discussion on this, and the discussion centered around the fact that Adam brought out that maybe it would be better if we took a look at a 5-year contract or 4-year or a longer length of time based on the fact that we have to do this every year, and also when it's awarded to a different vendor, the current vendor has to come and take all of their in-place dumpsters out, and the new contractor has to bring those dumpsters in, which takes a certain amount of time. So that is something that we discussed and felt that it might be a good idea, and Adam was going to look into that. Some of the advantages, he stated that there's other agencies that do that for a longer period of time than a year, and it would also allow a fixed number that you would know what it would be for the budget for X number of years. So we appreciate that suggestion, and as you pointed out, you would look at that over the next year. Now, since the meeting, there has been a couple of questions as to why don't we do this ourselves, garbage collection. The city of New York does this, obviously, and have hundreds and hundreds of huge packers and unionized workers to do this. For the city to actually get involved in this, there's a lot of regulations by DCNR and DEP. And when you collect garbage, if you're going to do it in a pickup truck, you've got to have it all bagged, and you have to take it over to the transfer station on 3rd Street, or else you have a packer. And as we know, we've got these red, white, and blue containers around the city. They would all have to be put in garbage bags. We just couldn't dump that into the back of a truck because DEP and DCNR regulates the leachate coming out of those vehicles, and they're very fussy on what is left on the roadway. So you'd also have to look at perhaps buying a packer at $250,000 to $750,000, depending on the size of it. So there's a lot involved if you're going to do the trash collection yourself. I think you'd have to really study that a little bit to find out exactly what it would cost and how you would meet DCNR and DEP regulations. I mean, I can't sit here and say that it would be more money or it would be less money. You don't know that until you would do a study of it. But then you'd also have to be looking at employees capable of doing that, who would do that, and if it's streets and parks employees, you know, how would they have the time to do that? So, you know, it's something that could be looked at in the future. But whether you award a contract for $22,799 or you do it yourself, there's going to be costs involved, whatever. Whether you could save money or not, that'd have to be looked at. So yes, we voted to send it to full council with a positive recommendation for approval.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Smith. Finance also reviewed it. Pardon me? Yeah, Bonnie wasn't here for that, and Liz is not here at this moment, so I'll cover that. We talked about the same things. The contract this year is a little bit over, it's $200, roughly $70, $80 more than last year, so it's in that neighborhood. We also talked about the same things, and if we went with a longer period contract, would that draw more bids into the process? Because we'd like to see more than two interested, and if we had a longer contract, it might be more attractive. We'd be able to market it maybe in a more attractive way as well. So it's something to think about for the future and to consider over this year. But we're pretty close to last year's budget, so that's good for now. And then we can make changes in the future. Any other questions or comments? Mr. Noviello?
Two, one for Adam and one for Mr. Girardi, if you wouldn't mind. Adam, who's taking care of our garbage hauling now?
Fred Ham Incorporated.
Okay, and they're the only other bidder then, right?
It was Fred Ham and Bauer Disposal.
Okay. All right. And Mr. Girardi, with respect to some of the concerns that Mr. Smith just spoke of, how do we contend with private individuals with pickup trucks who are running hauling services themselves through the community?
There is rules and regulations on how they can haul it. Everything must be in a leak-proof container. Nothing can spill out onto the road. It should be covered. It also should have a bed in the truck so nothing can leach onto the ground. The county does require them all to be licensed when they go through the transfer station. We do once a year go up, hand out pamphlets, letting the people who are up there, hand them out pamphlets, let them know what the rules and regulations are. If we have a problem, then we would get a hold of the police department because we can't really run down a truck, but they can. So that's how we handle that in our department.
So the only way to really monitor it is to have like checkpoint kind of things?
Correct. And the best way to do it is up at the transfer station. Periodically, our guys will go up, check to see what's going on. If we find them that they're not doing it, then we can give them a warning at that time. And hopefully the next time they do it, they're doing it by the proper rules and regulations.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Any other questions? I think I need to ask for, did I ask for a motion? No.
No, you didn't.
Okay, I will do that now. Is there a motion on this item?
So moved.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Hearing no more questions, Mrs. Frank, please.
Mr. Nubiallo.
Yes.
Mr. Smith.
Yes.
Mrs. Katz.
Yes.
Mr. Henderson.
Yes.
Mr. Allison.
Yes. Motion passes. We'll go to item 9 then. Thank you, Mr. Winder. Mrs. Frank, would you read it in short form, please?
Resolution of the City Council of the City of Williamsport authorizing execution of a 2017 Chodo agreement between the City of Williamsport and Greater Lycoming Habitat for Humanity in the amount of $35,000.
Thank you, Mrs. Frank. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second.
Good
Ms.
evening.
Mrs. Young, thank you.
This resolution and the one that follows obligates $35,000 of 2016 home funds and $35,000 of 2017 home funds to Greater Lycoming Habitat for Humanity for the construction of 2 single-family attached units. The units will be located at 1608 and 1610 Scott Street. The home program rules require that the city commit a minimum of 15% of its annual home allocation to a community housing development organization, better known as a CHODO. Greater Lycoming Habitat for Humanity is a certified CHODO, and we're allocating slightly more than the minimum requirement, but it is necessary to ensure that the project has sufficient funding. $65,000 of Lycoming County Fair Funds has also been committed, and Habitat's providing $55,000. Construction costs are estimated to be at $95,000 per unit, and the home funds will be used to pay for eligible construction costs, tap-on fees, and a developer's fee. Once the homes are constructed, Habitat will sell the homes at an affordable price to income-eligible households that have an income at or below 80% of the median income. Both of these agreements were reviewed by the Finance Committee.
Thank you, Mrs. Young. Yes, we did review these in finance. We're talking finance. We reviewed both of these, and they're both quite similar. So discussion on one probably answers any questions we would have about both of them. We approved this earlier, the money, and now we're assigning it to the actual projects. Some of the things we talked about in finance were the amount of time that the people that are going to live in these homes, these Habitat homes, spend on each project. And it's 250 working sweat equity hours per adult on each project. So there's a significant buy-in for the people that are going to own and live in these houses. There's a soft second mortgage on it that we will have. And Mrs. Young, would you explain how that's recaptured?
Yeah, it's a soft second mortgage. It's a 0% interest rate over a 10 or a 30% term. And if the home changes hands at any point, then we receive proceeds from the sale. If after 30 years the person is still in the home, they start to make loan payments. But it's a 0% interest rate and deferred for 30 years.
Mm-hmm. So that's a feature that allows us to recapture some of the CDBG money.
It's home funds.
Or it's
Fred,
home
but yeah.
funds, I'm sorry. But then they can be reused and,
Right, right.
and help other projects then. So that's a really good feature about the whole program, that there is a buy-in by the people that are going to buy the homes, and there's a certain accountability there as far as still maintaining the spirit of how the home is built and the people occupying it, that money is actually, some of it can be returned. Do you have anything of your notes?
Yeah, I mean, the only, and I'm not certain if you've discussed it, but Habitat actually has a terrific track record.
Absolutely,
In
yeah.
terms of their homes. They place the homes, the applicants for the homes, or the occupants for the homes are chosen before the home actually begins construction. As Randy said, each owner of the home, each coming owner of the home has to put 250 hours of sweat equity into the construction of the property. And what that means is they've only had 2 defaults, I believe, in the entire, out of all the properties they've put together in the city, which is pretty impressive given that these are, what's the income requirement again? Remind me, it's 80% of
It's
the median?
80% or lower of the median income, and it's based on family size. So,
But anyway, that's, our median income is not high in the city of Williamsport, and consequently 80% of the median income is, even lower. So for people who find themselves in that economic position to be able to follow through and pay a mortgage and take care of the maintenance on a home speaks, I think, both to the excellent caliber of the applicants that Habitat has, and also the exceptional way in which they both construct the homes and help to build ability within their applicants to handle a property and maintain a property. It's really a neat program, and we've been waiting for this one to come through for a while, since 2013, and we're really excited to see these houses going up
Yeah.
on Scott Street. And I'm trying to remember, aside from that, I'm assuming you also covered that the cash from the city is matched by both county fair funds and Habitat funding. So once again, it's a good partnership project with funding coming from a variety of sources.
It is. And there's a certain, coming back to the beginning about this whole project, is we remembered that the whole Brodart Memorial Homes projects, actually, the inception of that began with Habitat coming to a housing needs meeting and wondering what was going to be done with that Brodart property, that big building, and knowing that Brodart just wanted to get rid of it for $1 and have somebody else develop it, they envisioned if it would be possible for them to do that and build several homes there. And then as we got into the process, it became apparent that that was it was a lot bigger than what they could handle themselves, but it did lead to, one step led to another, and we have the memorial homes there today, which is a great reuse of that area. And then this was part of the original concept to include habitat in there, and these two homes fulfill that requirement. And so things are dovetailing nicely in that respect, and we're able to accomplish that. Any questions from council members? Okay, and we'll, hearing no questions, Mrs. Frank on item 9, that would be.
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Noviello?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Henderson?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes, and the motion passes. We'll move to item 10, and would you read that in short form, Mrs. Frank?
Resolution of the City Council of the City of Williamsport authorizing execution of a 2016 Chodo Agreement between the City of Williamsport and Greater Lycoming Habitat for Humanity in the amount of $35,000.
Yes, this is the exact same agreement, exact same amount of money. It's just coming from a different home year. It's-
Same, yeah. Same parameters and everything. Is there a motion on this?
So moved. Second.
In a second, thank you. Any other questions from council then? Hearing none, Mrs. Frank?
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Noviello?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Henderson?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes. Thank you, Mrs. Frank. Ms. Mealy, we moved the budget down to the end.
Yes.
So, okay. Item 11 then. Mrs. Frank, in short form, please.
Resolution authorizing a subrecipient agreement between the City of Williamsport and the Lycoming County SPCA.
Thank you. Is there a motion?
So moved. Second.
Motion and a second.
Yes, this is a subrecipient agreement. It allocates $4,730 to the Lycoming County SPCA for its spay-neuter voucher program for the pets of low-income residents. The SPCA will collect income information to verify the eligibility of the participants for the voucher program, and the funding for this project was approved during the 2017 Community Development Block Grant budget process. This subrecipient agreement was reviewed by the Finance Committee.
Thank you, Mrs. Young. Yes, we did review it. And Ms. Mealy?
Yes, Finance did review this, and we forwarded it to the full body of council with a positive recommendation. One quick note, since I always miss this, we actually approved this funding last year in the middle of the year, so mid-2016.
Right.
Because we do approve a similar amount for the SPCA pretty much annually out of our CDBG funding. Due to the relatively slow workings of the Community Development Block Grant System, we have now received the funding and can disperse it to the SPCA, and it will be retroactive to the beginning of fiscal year of January 2017. So the SPCA hopefully has been able to make do without it for most of the year, but now they will be able to fill in that budget gap, the $4,730. Because we had already, obviously, when we passed the Community Development Block Grant budget in 2016, foreseen the disbursement of these funds, Finance had no reason whatsoever to question that they were going to the SPCA, as they deservedly do.
Any questions or comments from council? Mr. Noviello?
I just want to take a moment to thank the folks at the SPCA for the services that they provide. They really have taken some burden off of the city in ways that are easily countable, and that we see numbers-wise when it comes to our public safety meetings regarding animal calls and things of a similar nature that we've expressed some concern about pretty much monthly. This kind of a program is great for a community our size. What I really appreciate from the SPCA is the reports that they send us. Completely thorough, very well done, easily readable, and a really good and strong financial accounting of how these funds are being spent. And, with respect to some of the other funds of a similar nature that we give out, it would be nice to get reports of this nature from those recipients as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Noviello. Any other questions or comments from council? Hearing none, Mrs. Frank?
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Nubiallo?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz? Mr. Henderson?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Young. I'm going to bypass item 12 for now, and we'll do that right before the budget since it relates in some ways. We'll move to item 13, land development. Mrs. Frank? Or we don't have anything on, do we need a motion on this?
You need a motion.
Okay.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Mr. Nar.
Good evening, Vice Chair, members of City Council. What I'm bringing before you tonight is a land development modification from Danco Holding LP. The original land development was approved back in October 2014. It is currently for the Liberty Arena that is currently there now. One of the conditions of the land development back then was that a sidewalk be the whole front width of the facility. At this point in time, they are requesting to modify that by adding an extension on the front of the building, the whole width of the building, which will encompass a little over 7,100 square feet. It will provide a gaming room, a restaurant, and other things of that nature. In doing so, what it does is it removes the sidewalk to the southern portion of the Liberty Arena. It will no longer exist. So the only entranceway to come in through there will be the access through an access easement or the access driveway coming from 3rd Street. They have, in the expansion of that part of the building, on the side of the building, they are going to put an entrance so people can enter from the side, but the actual parking, not the parking, but the actual sidewalk is being removed, and that was a condition back in 2014 that council did put on that. One of the other questions and concerns was the fact that with adding the addition, they are removing the required handicap parking stalls. They have entered into an agreement with the Williamsport Parking Authority to relocate those stalls from in front of the building over onto the Williamsport Parking Authority side of that. At this time, it was reviewed by both county, it was not reviewed by county, but it was reviewed by the Planning Commission, and the Planning Commission did have some recommendations. One of the recommendations was the fact that upon April 30th of 2018, that as one part of the land development that was approved, as you see, the one lot was supposed to be a parking lot. That has not been developed, and at this point, it has not been grassed and seeded. They made the recommendation that no later than April of 2018, that either be a parking lot based off of the land development plan developed, or it be grassed and seeded. So that was one of the conditions that they had. The other condition that the Planning Commission did recommend is the ADA parking spaces, which will be relocated onto the Parking Authority. They felt that because that is a requirement for ADA parking for Liberty Arena, that signage should be placed by Liberty Arena saying that that handicap parking for those 4 stalls is for the purpose of Liberty Arena. They were the conditions that they had. The other condition that they had, a requirement that they had, a recommendation that they had, was that all access agreements between the Williamsport Parking Authority and Danco Holdings LP be completed prior to and recorded prior to a certificate of occupancy for the expansion of the new building. They were the recommendations by the Planning Commission, and at this point I can answer any questions.
Questions from council? Ms. Mealy?
The Planning Commission did not address the status of the Discovery Building structure that's right next to the parking, the proposed parking lot that is not currently a parking lot.
What it is in front of the Discovery Workshop, as part of the original land development, there was a parking lot layout that was approved as part of that.
I'm aware of that.
Yep.
I guess my issue is that the Discovery Building is also in relatively disreputable condition.
What, I can answer that question.
Sure.
If you remember correctly, the reason why nothing was done with either was because of the structural integrity of the Discovery Workshop, which I've been after the attorney for several months, maybe a
Right.
year. At this point, he has given me an answer that the building is structurally sound. That's the
Right.
reason why they're doing a subdivision.
Yeah.
I have sent out a letter. He's required to take care of all the problems on the Discovery Workshop and either seed or grass or put a parking lot in by April 30th.
Okay.
And if he sells the building to you, me, or whoever, that person who buys that building has the same condition. By April 30th, it must be addressed.
Okay, so that should be a condition as well of the land.
I have it in letter form. It's up to you. It's,
My preference would be to double down. I would like to see that taken care of before April 30th, if at all possible, but certainly by April 30th. I get feedback on that on at least a weekly basis from people in town. It doesn't seem to me that it's doing Danco Holdings any favors owning a property that looks like that, and I would hope that it would be in their best interest to take care of it prior to them. But in the meantime, I think we should certainly include it as a condition on this land development, if that was the as long as we're including the parking lot or seated in grass, whichever, we should also include the stabilizing of the structure. And I'm pleased to hear that it is structurally sound. That had been my impression as well from discussions with them. But I would like to see us move on that sooner.
if you're going to
rather
place
than
that condition, then you need to put it on for him or the new owner.
Right.
Either
Okay.
whoever owns the building by April 30th.
Basically make it a
is required to
transferable
fix the
condition, if
discovery.
you will.
Yes.
Got it. J. David, is there wording that we would use for that?
Adding that to,
It's
as a condition?
basically saying that both of those lots, since we presumably may be subdividing them here shortly, both the proposed parking area and the Discovery Building, should they be transferred to a new owner between now and April 30th, would be required to be either, to be stabilized, that is to say, either seated in leveled and grassed over, or constructed as a parking lot in the one case, and the building stabilized and brought up to code in the other.
I think you would add that as a land development modification or condition, together with whatever the county provided.
Got it. This is actually, I think, City Planning Commission, correct? Right.
Whatever the city planning commission.
Yeah, well, I remember the one about I think perhaps maybe toward the end of discussion, we should just collect all of them in one cogent thing, and then I will ask if those conditions are amenable.
And is there a representative of the owner?
Yes.
Could get a commitment from the.
Exactly. Right.
Could you come up here, please?
So just to follow up, I'm assuming this is, obviously, we don't have any control, thank you, over the interior development as it stands. I mean, we'll see it in terms of codes, but we're not reviewing that. And I know that this is a proposed drawing, not a final drawing. The exterior, I'm assuming, will come back before us for review as a certificate of appropriateness. Got it. And then, just for my information, is what used to be the Picklener Arena being repurposed? Will Fly World continue to be there? I'm seeing that we've got some laser tag and bowling lanes, and I'm not sure.
What they're looking at doing is they're doing some renovations to the existing Liberty Arena, Picklener Arena. They're adding a 12-lane bowling alley. They're going to add 4,500 square foot of a gaming floor with an adjacent lounge. An area consists of both fixed tables and bar seating. The addition that they're requesting to put on will contain a laser tag area with accessory spaces such as briefing room, vesting rooms, control rooms, new restrooms, a small lounge, information desk, and a new restaurant with outdoor seating.
Right. I guess what I'm asking is, they're adding the bowling, you'll excuse me, because I actually, maybe at some point here shortly, maybe a patron of Fly World, but I've never gone as an adult. Now that I have a kid, we may wind up there, but.
They're renovating the existing basketball area.
Got it. Okay, so that's what's being converted. I was going to say, I'm not sure what the interior layout looks like right now. Okay. Okay, so Fly World will be there and continue to have a rear entrance, and then the front entrance will access the bowling alley. I know that there have been some issues with handicapped accessibility to the entire property. Have those been totally resolved?
Yes.
Okay, all right. And we're not generating any potential new issues with the new development currently, right? All that's going to be single floor, right? Okay. Yeah, I don't see any issue. That the new proposed handicap parking seems suitable to me. The only major problem, of course, is that we're already short on parking there. And so to lose 4 spaces. But for, I think this will be a nice addition both to Liberty Arena and to the area in general. I suspect it will, there will be a fair, I think it will be, just a nice addition to that part of town. So I'm excited to see it moving forward. I am slightly concerned about the sidewalk, but I will, at least temporarily, yield the floor to other members of council to see if anyone else shares that concern. I'm trying to think of something we might be able to do about that, because I do feel as though there may be access from the south. I know I've walked it periodically myself, so.
There will actually be an access from 3rd Street going into the facility. It's just when you come around, there is a access drive that goes from 3rd Street to 4th Street for traffic-wise.
Right.
They won't be, when they walk up through there, they'll be walking up there at their own risk. That's the only issue.
Yeah, but the sidewalk itself stops before the drive. It looks like the sidewalk for some reason goes to the corner. Where is the access off 3rd? I'm sorry.
The access out there will be on the side of the building.
I understand, but there are a few doors on the side.
On the new addition.
Okay, so the one that says mechanical?
It'll be on the new addition going in off, because we discussed that at the planning. Also, we discussed that when we were in the meeting with the owner and his representatives concerning another avenue to go to get someone into the building without having to go through there.
Got it.
So you'll see that when it comes back through for your certificate of appropriateness and your land.
Okay, all right, so it's not on the existing rendering, is what you're telling me. Okay, I was gonna say, I don't know if they're walking to the laser tag room or what, but it doesn't strike me as a good idea.
No, basically, that was one of the first renderings they had. We've gone through a couple different ones, and like I said, it's not the final one. You will receive that when we go through the certificate.
Got it, good. My only other concern, I suppose, moving forward into the certificate of appropriateness phase, it seems as though this must be working out fairly well for Danco Holdings, the property, correct? I know that when we had originally reviewed a certificate of appropriateness for the entire structure, council had somewhat bent the rules on on some of the standards for our certificate of appropriateness. I would prefer, when it comes back through for review for this new edition, that we abide by what frankly are relatively lax standards in our downtown design standards.
And that was addressed during our meeting. They
Correct.
just felt it wasn't appropriate to bring it forward at this time. They
Okay.
wanted to make sure they could get the modification approved first
Right.
before they send it out to architecture.
That's fine, I'm just, since we haven't completely finished the external design, I think what I'm saying is,
What
I would
you'll
hope
see-
that it will live by the, live and die
What
by
you'll
the.
see is there'll be large amounts of windows on the front, basically all of it. Metal-
Okay.
Basically windows all the way across the front of it. There will be metal to match the metal that's there now. There will be
Right.
stone base, just to match the stone base there, but not as much metal as you see now.
Okay,
I think
sounds
that was
good.
one of the things
A little
council
less
was-
warehousey, a little more businessy, right? Okay, that would be I think, a fine improvement to the structure. Okay, I'm done being a pain in the butt for the time being. Would anybody else like to say anything?
Mr. Novio,
I want to go back to the sidewalk thing again. Gary, can you tell me if we're able to adapt what we've done in the past regarding the requirement for that sidewalk versus not having it now? And does it put us in line for concerns about the ADA people?
No, it won't, because the ADA will basically, they will have a sidewalk access to from their, because the ADA will be in front of the building itself, so when they come in and park, it's not like they're gonna be accessing it from there. They will be able to come in that side door, and that will be ADA, the side door coming in from 3rd Street. So exit off 3rd Street will be a where will be a sidewalk going into the new part of the expansion of the building, and that will be ADA requirement based off of codes.
Also, ADA does allow you to cross a pedestrian or a driveway as they have now, as long as it's within a certain distance of the building. You can either go up tight to the building with your ADA requirements, or you can cross a parking lot as long as it's 1 in 12 grade to the building, which this will be.
And how much space is going to be minus sidewalk on 3rd Street, if that's what we're talking about?
It's this whole length.
About 30, 40 feet maybe.
Okay.
It's the part for the building south, which is about 30 feet, 30, 40, off the top of my head.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
Ms. Mueller.
Sorry. Following up again, one suggestion I might make, and I don't see it here on the rendering, but one condition we can impose, I suppose, would be some sort of pedestrian, like a pedestrian walkway, a designated pedestrian walkway on the parking lot.
We already identified that, and they agreed, so even though you don't have it on your drawing, that was something that was already agreed upon.
Okay.
We requested.
So we're doing basically a designated pedestrian walkway on both sides of that main artery. or park.
That was all
Okay.
that plan.
All right, so we can lay that as a condition then as well, just because, but it's agreed upon already. All right, that's certainly an improvement. Okay.
Any other questions, council? Mayor?
Good evening, Mr. Vice President, members of City Council. I appreciate you taking a look at this wonderful plan that I believe is a early Christmas gift to our children. As mayor of this city for many years, I've been approached by quite a few children that have said, could we have a Hooplas or a Chuck E. Cheese in the city? Well, with your assistance in regards to this modified land development, that can truly happen in this city. But also, we're going to be adding a few jobs, building permit fees, which are very, very important to future budgets and this budget as well, and of course, additional taxes. So we'd really appreciate you taking a look at this tonight as you are at this point, and I know that quite a few families are going to be very, very happy once construction begins. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Any other questions?
Mr. Allison, I recommend that you itemize whatever conditions you're attaching
Okay.
to the land development plan, get the owner's representative's assent on the record.
Okay.
Do you want me to go down through?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Let's go
Yes.
down through.
The first one will be the pedestrian walkway across from the main arteries. The second will be handicap signs identifying their handicap for Liberty Arena. They will be required April 30th to have the grass lot either planned as a planned land development or grass and seeded. And the other issue is going to be the
Steve.
discovery workshop actually should be brought into code within that April 30th timeframe as well. Whether it be Danco Holding LP or the new developer at this time.
And that would also be a certificate of appropriateness that you would have to approve prior to them doing any work on the discovery workshop. You will see that prior to them doing anything.
Right. And just as a quick question on that, Joe, I'm not sure, does that even apply to basic stabilization of the structure? That is to say, there are those holes on the side of the building that it would seem like perhaps, they could be attended to without a certificate of appropriateness, but I'm not sure.
There are
Is that-
certain things that they could do without certificate of appropriateness. You're looking for the look of the building, what it's going to look like. Like down below grade, there's a couple areas where they're gonna have to fill in some block, they're gonna have to put some structural rods in and so forth. That won't come in front of you, that's all gonna get buried once they do the backfilling. But anything above grade would definitely come before you guys or you, the council, for approval.
That would be good. I guess I'm interested in seeing anything that's actually like allowing the elements into the building get fixed as quickly as possible.
Correct.
And if that means it doesn't come before us, then I'm assuming that they'll have to add to it over and above that anyway. And the front stairs, for instance, are in rough shape. but-
Yeah, if they're gonna put a steel lintel across and put the brick back up and the granite slate and all that kind of stuff, I don't believe that's gonna come back through. All they're gonna do is replace what was there.
Right.
It's what they're gonna do with the wall that's been removed and it's not brick. That's what you're gonna wanna see.
Exactly. Yes, so thank you. I think that summarizes it very well. Thank you very much, Mr. Nair. Can we get the representative on the record, please? Can you give us your name and your address for the record and then say that you were sent?
from Hall Bakers, Montoursville, PA. We are under contract to backfill the area adjacent to the building where the parking lot goes before April 30th. The intent right now is for that area to be grassed and seeded.
So you assent to the conditions that we've placed on the?
Yes, I am.
All four of the conditions?
Absolutely.
We need that for the record.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think we've got everything wrapped up that we've talked about so far. Is there anything else from council?
Nothing from me.
I guess I'd ask if there's any kind of a timeline suggested at this point.
You mean on the remaining
Other than
project?
April.
Yeah.
Right. We don't anticipate any construction starting until spring, when the weather would break.
Meaning on any portion of this, correct, including on the arena portion?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Nothing, no more questions then. On item 13, Mrs. Frank, please.
Are we making the conditions? Oh, they're already in, okay. Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Noviello?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Henderson?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes, item 13 passes. Then item 14, subdivision Danko Holden. Is there a motion?
Second.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Nair?
What we bring before you again is this is in reference to the Liberty Arena. Danco Holding LP is requesting to subdivide and add 2 additional lots. Lot 2 will contain .23 acres. Lot 1 will contain .321. The residual will be 2.4 acres after the subdivision is approved. Again, based off of the drawings you have, Lot 1 will actually be, is currently a vacant lot. I think that's how it is. Lot 1's a discovery.
Lot 2 is the vacant lot.
Lot 1 is,
discovery.
Lot 1 is the actual discovery workshop.
Right.
Lot 2 is the vacant lot. And again, there is, because it is an essential business district, there is no setbacks or anything at this point, no lot size requirements or anything like that. It was reviewed by both planning through the county and through the city, and they gave positive recommendations for approval. I know the county had a comment in there in reference to the deed book. You have the older version, I have the new ones that are signed by the county, correcting question number 1 from the county's review. And I do have a representative here at this time.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Nar. Questions or comments from council? Ms. Mealy?
Just that I'm delighted to see this moving forward, and that I hope that we find a suitable use for that Discovery building ASAP. Thanks.
Thank you for your efforts in that behalf, Ms. Mealy. Any other questions or comments from council? Hearing none. Mrs. Frank?
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Noviello?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Henderson?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes. And motion passes. Item 15, certificate of appropriateness.
Yes, good evening, members of council. What you have before you is a request for a certificate of appropriateness to erect a recognition sign on the newly constructed canopy at the property at 201 West 4th Street, which is owned by FP Partnership. The sign is approximately about a foot tall, about 12 feet long. I have attached a photo of what the sign looks like. It is a metal plate painted black with aluminum letters, and I do have a representative here if anyone has any questions of him or myself.
Well, we need a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any questions, comments from council? Hearing none, Mrs. Frank?
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Noviello?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Henderson?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes. Thank you, Mrs. Frank.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Girardi. We'll move back to item 12. Would you read that in short form?
Resolution to authorize a memorandum of understanding between the City of Williamsport and the Williamsport Waves swim team.
Thank you, Mrs. Frank. Is there a motion?
So move.
Second.
Motion and a second. Thank you. And Megan Page.
Yes. Good evening, Council. What you have in front of you is a resolution to authorize a memorandum of understanding between the City of Williamsport and the Williamsport Waves team. As we know, Waves is a youth swim team that participates in the Greater Susquehanna League and provides an outlet for youth. And the main points that I want to address in this memorandum of understanding is that for the 2018 season, the city would be providing lifeguards during the practices and meets, and the Williamsport Waves swim team would be providing the coaches to coach the league. And that in order to utilize the facility, Waves agrees to have all swim team members purchase a pool membership to Splash Cove. And there will be 3 different types of memberships. Your standard family membership, which would allow swimmers full access to the pool even outside of the practices. Your student membership, which again would allow full access, and then a swim team only membership, which allow the swimmers to utilize the pool just during practices and meets. This was reviewed and recommended to full body by finance on Tuesday.
Thank you, Ms. Page. Finance, Ms. Neely?
Yes, indeed. Finance did review this and pass it to the full body of council with the positive recommendation. And all two of us. Mr. Henderson was also in attendance, and as he is the representative from council to the Rec Commission, and we actually had quite a good discussion about the agreement. This agreement is actually, I think, far better than what we were anticipating seeing with the Waves organization. I believe that the primary council had two primary concerns, one of which was, of course, that the city not wind up subsidizing the operation in any egregious fashion, subsidizing the team, and secondarily that part of the reason that we didn't want that to happen is that the team has really an excellent, a very active parental group behind it, and it would be a hard thing for the city's recreation program, which really consists of one person and a part-time person, to manage an entire swim team throughout the summer. Consequently, the active parental presence on the Waves swim team is really key to the success of the program. And so I think there was a fear that if the city took on too much of the responsibility and too much of the sort of expense associated with the program, the city would wind up de facto running the program, and that could in the end be the death of the program. This agreement kind of neatly divides, the team collects dues from all of its members. With those dues, they purchase the services of both a coach and an assistant coach. And then the city provides, of course, the lifeguards and the space for the team to practice. We'll also be insuring the team, but just as part of our general insurance policy on our parks system. And what sounds like pretty nominal price of a swim team pool membership will cover perhaps any other costs, associated with some of the upkeep of the pool that the swim team needs specifically. But really, it's quite a nice deal. I think it keeps the responsibilities of the team and the responsibilities of the city rather nicely separate, so that both can continue to exist and do their own thing, and they don't really need to worry about one another too much. And I think that will be less of a headache for our recreation director, and ideally also give the team the autonomy that they need to continue functioning and growing here moving forward. The other thing that we discussed is that the Wave swim team has had a hard time with the city's over a few years there where we were moving back and forth between pools, and we weren't sure which pool we were going to keep and which pool we were going to get rid of, and they lost a number of members. So the Waves team and the rec department are going to work together to try and make sure that the Waves team has a stable schedule and stable space and stable use of the space moving forward, which should enable them to build their subscription base substantially and make them more sustainable in the long run. So thank you very much to both HR and Finance for putting this together, and to the Rec Department, who's not here represented because she's off on maternity leave. So it's a good agreement, and we look forward to seeing how it works in 2018 and hopefully continuing it moving forward.
They did a really good job, and we appreciate navigating everything that went into this. It's nice that they gave us a history of the swim team and the recreation program and how it all coalesced. And I just want to read a couple things from that. It was, of course, we've talked before that our pool system, our two pools, were not built by the city, but built by the community. And it was fundraised from citizens and businesses. So it wasn't a recreation department initiative, but obviously the two coalesced pretty well. So it came under the recreation department then. And in '76, the City of Williamsport Rec Department sponsored and ran two summer swim team programs, one at each pool. And then around 81, the two merged into one city team, which remained under the rec department until the late '90s, when they were farmed out to the YWCA, and subsequently the YMCA took over the city's recreation department. So the reason we needed this MOU is because of the various changes and iterations that have happened along the way. And now, when we started our recreation program up again, there wasn't the continuity there so that we could just, everything would be in order just like it had always been because of the lapse. So all this MOU does is give us definition, it gives us parameters, it's good for us, it's good for the swim team, in that now we have some rules and regulations, or at least an agreement, that we can both operate under, so there won't be any question marks. And we had a little period early in the year where there was a gray area and no one was sure, and the institutional memory wasn't there for some of us of how the city interacted with the swim team. So what this does is address all those problems. It's equitable for both sides, and really we saw that having a swim team program under the rec department is a positive, because we don't want the rec department putting most of its efforts into one-time events that come and go, but programs that are consistent and keep going on act to serve a lot greater pool of people that are going to be using it and benefit from it. So that's what we want our rec department focusing on, and this also works very nicely with that as well. So again, it's a lot of hard effort and work went into bringing us back to this place. So are there any other questions? Or Mr. Henderson?
Yeah, I just wanted to say we are excited to continue with the Waves team. We're glad that they're going to be using the pool, and that's been the desire. I think this is excellent for us to clarify things. And as a government, we need to have things clear and transparent. That's what this does for us. You know, gone are the days of just kind of a handshake agreement. We can't do that anymore, as much as I'd like to be able to do that. But today's world is different, and so this kind of keeps us up with the times of today. And so I'm very thankful. I think this is a great agreement. We did talk a little bit about insurance, and our insurance consultant assured us that this looks good, what we have here. And most everything in this agreement are things that we would be providing anyway, and that's good, and things that we should be providing because it's our pool. And so I think this is a great benefit for us and for the swim team. And I look forward to kind of building this partnership and relationship in the future. I think we can do that now that we have some clarity as to what the relationship is exactly. So I look forward to seeing where this is going to go in the future, and we hope the best for the swim team. Hope it's a great success and brings even more attraction to the pool. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Henderson. Any other questions or comments from council? Hearing none and seeing none. Mrs. Frank on the question, please.
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Nubiallo?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Henderson?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes, thank you, Mrs. Frank. All right, we'll go back up to item number 5, and the ordinance adopting our operating budgets and general funds. Mrs. Frank, in short form, please.
Adopting various operating budgets for the city of Williamsport, including the general fund, utility fund, WBT capital projects fund, liquid fuels fund, city hall operating fund, WBT planning, unemployment compensation fund, debt service fund, trade and transit center, Act 13 fund, and pool repairs capital fund.
Thank you, Mrs. Frank. Is there a motion?
So move.
A second? There's a second. Thank you.
Mr. Vice Chairman,
Yeah.
since I did not participate in either one of the budget sessions, I will not be participating in the budget deliberations, and I will be leaving. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councilman Smith. Okay, well, we've covered a lot of ground over the past few meetings, and this is the time where we go back through, and if there are any more questions on any parts of the budget or any changes that anyone would want to make to any part of the operating budget. Our next ordinance will be setting the tax rate. So the tax rate is going to be based on any changes or no changes that we make at this point. So is there any discussions or questions or interest in looking at any particular parts of the budget tonight? Ms. Mealy?
I do see a note here from the administration asking us to reallocate some funds for the procurement position that we were examining in the finance office. Perhaps the best way to get this whole discussion started would be to take care of that via a motion. Would that be?
Yeah, that
Okay.
was discussed. We had budgeted that position, the RVT budget, early on, and it was continued to be budgeted in the city budget. So what we're suggesting is revising it similar to what we did when we had contracted services with the Public Service Department, with RVT doing some oversight. So we're suggesting with that memo to put certain dollars into the contracted services line item for the city. So, whatever cost allocation we have with the city, then we would charge against that particular line item.
Excellent. Are there any other, I'm assuming we don't need to modify the salary detail. Will we get new paperwork for that as well? I'm just thinking about other places where this item occurs.
Yep.
Oh, excuse me. I didn't read that one. It didn't have a number. It didn't have a page number in front of it. All right, excellent. Mr. Smith, J. David Smith, what, can I make this all as one? Yes. Okay. So I'd like to make a motion to amend the salary detail on page 3 to remove the purchasing coordinator position. Make a motion to amend the line 51010 salaries on page 23 from $82,326 to $36,201. And also on page 23 to add to the account contract services 79100. Take it from $0 to $46,125. Do I have a second on that motion?
Second.
Okay.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any more discussion from council on that? Mr. Henderson?
Yeah, just to note, this is a shared position, and so it clarifies in the budget, and I think it's better than seeing this position in two places. So that's good. It just clarifies it better. So it's just one position, and the city will then contract from RVT or however that looks. But that's kind of how, I think this is good. It clarifies it for everyone. And so I thank you for making these recommendations.
Any other questions? Hearing none, Mrs. Frank on the motion.
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Noviello?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Henderson?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes. Thank you. Mrs. Frank, and thank you, Ms. Mealy. Then back to council. Questions or comments? Mr. Henderson?
I would like to make a motion for an amendment here on page 21. If I can find it. This is the, this would go along with the Waves MOU that we just
Yes.
talked about. The top of the page there, seasonal salaries. The proposed is 48,000. I would recommend that we reduce that by 1,800 to 46,200. And then also, if I can put this together with, on page 5, which would be the, find it here, the income estimate under, I believe this was coming in at pool admissions. So rather than the 35,000, we would also reduce that by $1,800 to make that 33,200. What that is the Waves team was giving 1,800 to the city, then the city was paying the Waves team coach. The MOU makes that unnecessary, and so we're dropping that estimate of income and then also dropping that salary line item as well.
Ms. Mealy?
Well, actually, Joel has a motion on the table, right?
I'll second that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, right.
And then,
Right. Oh, you were seconding.
no, well,
Oh.
I had a question.
Okay.
Then it occurred to me it was inappropriately timed.
Mr. Noviello seconded, so.
Okay. Just a question about whether or not we would also need to modify the salary detail for that.
With the reduction to 51050 on page 21, that will, I'll kick that back to the salary detail.
Okay, excellent.
There's not a specific position in the salary detail for a coach.
Yeah, I noticed, so. Other than that, as I said, the Waves swim agreement, I think, is an excellent, the Waves MOU is an excellent one. And so I'm glad to see us tidying up that in the budget as well.
Yes. Any more comments on that proposed change? Okay. Mrs. Frank on the motion.
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Noviello?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Henderson?
Yes?
Mr. Allison?
Yes. Thank you, Mrs. Frank. And thank you, Mr. Henderson. Any other questions or? Mr. Henderson?
I'm just wondering, on page 22, this is a question. We talked briefly about the planning expense on page 22 there. We're going from 50,000 up to 150,000. We talked just a little bit about that. I wonder, could you address that again and just give me some clarity on exactly the need for that?
The, currently, and which has been the case over the past 2 years, the city carried the cost for consulting services for government affairs related to Penn Strategies. River Valley Transit carried the cost for Delta Development for our needs. More or less, Penn Strategies focused on state funding and grants and those type of things, and Delta Development worked more on the federal level, so it was good synergy between the two. And most recently, Delta Development has been working on our RACB grants, the administration of it, and again, trying to secure grants. Most of our major capital needs have been addressed. So right now, the primary services that Delta Development is providing relates to RACB and Bowman Field RACB. They're also working on the levy grant possibilities. The RACB grant related to the Trade and Transit Center. You remember that originally the RACB grant was going to go to Liberty Arena, but it was transferred to the city for our contribution back to Liberty Arena, so they assisted with all that and grant administration. That's primarily done. So now the services they're providing are, the majority are for the city. So I can't really justify carrying the entire cost for those services. So what we're suggesting in this budget is to share that cost with the city. So what that represents is a continuation of a contract with Penn Strategies, which we bring forth in January, and also a clarification of what Delta Development will be providing for the city as well for next year in January. So again, it's just being a transfer of the responsibility of these consulting services and how they're allocating their resources related to the scope of services.
And this line item provides for that. We would, of course, have to see that come again before us, before that before that agreement.
Yeah, the first meeting in January, I think, when in fact just prior to this meeting, the mayor and I met with a representative from Penn Strategies going over their scope of services, and we've been working with Delta Development as well to finalize what they will be providing to the city as it relates to scope of services, and hope to bring that to council at the first meeting in January.
One of the reasons why I I'm desperately looking in our budget for some needed funds. It was discussed in our work sessions about the fire department needs, especially in the future, regarding some purchases of vehicles and things like that. And we talked about setting up some type of a fund for that. And I'm digging, I'm looking, I'm searching. And so this is a difficult one for me because I'm not familiar with Delta, and I know I'm only 2 years into this, but that's a hard justification there when I know we will need things in the fire department in the future. So I'm just thinking through this, just processing these things at that point. So that helps me. I appreciate that explanation.
Well, one of the things, and again, this doesn't represent the total cost of what they provide in terms of their consulting services. We tried to keep a modest number in there because we have all these grant administration needs ongoing, which will be completed next year. So in subsequent years, we may not need as much money in that particular line item for consulting services, but we have a number of contracts and grants. They're very much involved in East 3rd Street. They're the ones that, Delta that is, secured the first grant for East 3rd Street, $777,000, which was brought to council. We have about 2 or 3 other grants out there for the East 3rd Street strategy. So they're instrumental in that particular project. So taking away their ability to do that, and as I mentioned in an earlier meeting, East 3rd Street is primarily a city revitalization project in partnership with Lycoming College, and we can justify a little bit of services for RVT because we like to see two-way traffic on East 3rd Street, but the rest of the project is really a city project, a Lycoming College project. So again, we're adding a minimal amount for Delta Development, but they have a big role, like I said, in closing out projects, and as well as, finding funding and administrating grants for the East 3rd Street project. So that would be tough to like I said, it's,
Mrs. Katz.
You said we're going to get a contract for Penn Strategies in January?
Yes.
And they'll clarify exactly what they're going after and what they're doing?
Mhm.
Will we get the same thing from Delta? Contract?
Yes, we'll show you exactly what,
But a contract?
yes.
Because since it's going to be switching from RVT to the city?
Well, just part of it, part of the funding. The primary contract would still stay with RVT. Unless you're willing to absorb the entire contract, which would be very nice. I would appreciate that. That would be a great Christmas present. Thank you.
But that's going to be clarified in the
Yes.
contract for us, that there will be, as we're finding out, there are shared services in different areas with the budget, as we've found out so far. The thing I found interesting is, we on city council contracted Penn Strategies to look in for city projects and city funding. How did Delta get involved in city projects on the Third Street project? I find that interesting, since, like I said, we on city council contracted.
Again, the split with Delta, when we discussed that and we went with Penn Strategies a few years ago, was Penn Strategies primarily looked at state funding, and Delta looked at the federal side of things. And so these grants that we're getting, even though they're affiliated with the state, are federal dollars. So, but now it's becoming more of a blur in terms of where the dollars are coming from, what projects. So Delta has a contract with Lycoming College, so we have a cooperation agreement through Delta to manage the East Third Street project with Lycoming College, because they have an affiliation with Lycoming College. So I guess we just have to review the contracts and see how, how we're splitting up the scope of services.
We also want to know, like I stated, who's doing what to whom, and are they crossing over on one another?
They're not, believe me, they're not, yeah.
We've got to have, know what track they're on.
Right. Again, we've come at a crossroads where Delta was serving our needs primarily because we had, with all the funding for trade and transit, for buses, and for all the projects that we had. And now with East 3rd Street, it's more of a city project than an RVT project. So, and Penn Strategies is working on certain things for the city, and Delta's working on other things. So we need to have that in front of council to show just how we're sort of, RVT will still fund part of Delta because there is a need there, but.
They've handled your business for years.
Yeah, but, so we need to be very, make sure council understands that I can't justify funding the whole contract now because of how things have transitioned to more of a city project than an RVT project on the Delta side.
Well, we'll see how it all clarifies with the contracts in January.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good point, Mrs. Katz. Mr. Henderson?
So we're basically looking to Delta to help us with this East 3rd Street project.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm looking here at some funding. This I received probably 6 months ago, and most of the Phase 1 funds had been either secured or applied for.
Through Delta.
Through Delta. And then, so the Phase 2 funds is what we're looking for right now.
Continuation of, yes. Right.
And we're hoping that Delta will secure for us, it looks like somewhere on the order of what, $1 million?
Well, the whole funding package, the strategy was $10 million.
Right.
In addition to that $10 million, they're assisting Lycoming College with a RACB grant, I think in the amount of $4 million, which we should hear soon. And we're also waiting to hear about a multimodal grant in the amount of $1.5 million within the next few weeks.
But I'm talking about future.
It's more than $1 million. I think it's more than $1 million that I don't have that funding strategy.
Basically, what I'm getting at is we'll be depending on them. We'll be, giving them $75,000 or something like that in order to get $1 million.
Yes, and assisting us with closing out a $3 million RACB grant for trade and transit and a $1.25 RACB grant for Bowman Field.
Closing those out.
Yes.
Which have already been initiated, and we're in the process.
But then they should be closed out, I'm hoping, first half of 2018.
So we've got some work to do, for Phase 1, as far as, all of the construction and everything. So there's a lot to be done. Do we anticipate that we'll be moving into Phase 2 soon?
Yes.
How soon?
I'm not sure which phase, how you define Phase 2.
Well, I'm using this.
Oh, yes, right. Are you looking at Phase 2 as the bottom part of that?
Correct.
Really, that's all just one phase. It's somewhat being broken down into two phases because the two-way traffic on Third Street and how that's turned into a much larger issue. But right now, it looks like what we're calling Phase 1 is primarily the Basin Street corridor.
Yep.
Up to Lycoming College, Franklin Street.
Yep.
And then Phase 2, which I think is down below, is East Third Street, a streetscape, and a portal,
Yep.
and Russell and Heritage Park, and that type of thing.
Correct.
So,
Correct.
so Phase 2, yes, we are getting into that, but the issue is what we need to satisfy PennDOT in terms of transportation impact study, more than what we've done already, to justify getting them to agree to that two-way traffic change between Mulberry and Market. So we have monthly meetings with them on this on the East Third Street project. So, I mean, it's moving ahead now, but they have pushed East Third Street reconstruction back a couple years. So yes, we're moving forward on it. Do I have a good timeline for you? No, but we're moving ahead on pursuing grants though. Like Green Light Go, which is down on the bottom half, we are pursuing that one. We, in fact, council approved resolution to apply for Green Light Go, if you recall, not too long ago, for about $900,000. So we are moving ahead on all parts of the project.
Ms. Mealy? Or,
Actually, I think Mr. Novio.
okay, Mr. Novio.
Just a quick comment and then a question. I know that, as I understand it at least, Penn Strategies has a good, strong working relationship with our senatorial representation here locally. So maybe a federal connection isn't as far away as we think it might be with them. And secondly, I'm assuming, Bill, that when we talked about clarifying responsibilities, will those clarifications help us determine how this money will be dispersed between these two parties? I would not personally like to see Penn Strategies lose their current contract in the same amount that they have.
I would agree with that, and you're right. They do have great contacts, and they provide invaluable services. Currently, their contract is $75,000, and the administration strongly believes that should not be reduced at all. So, but we're you know, there may be a justification for more, I don't know, because they provided a really solid scope of work for next year, and that's for council to look at and react to. I mean, we have a lot on our plate, so there's room for, I think, both bring something to the table based on what's
I agree.
going on now.
I wouldn't want Penn Strategies to be discouraged by any decisions that we make here. And,
No, we try to make that clear to them, and I know it's, I know I feel, especially Penn Strategy feels like they need to more or less to justify more than they really should have to. But I think what we're trying to do is making sure that we have a clear role for both and make sure that, you know, what they bring to the table as a synergy is even a better situation, have both working together, so.
I can appreciate cross Ts and dotted Is.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Ms. Mealy?
Yeah, just, I think ever since I was elected to council, I've been made somewhat uncomfortable by the concept of planning funds, you know, but on the other hand, we have, in my time on council, received a number of grants, both federal and state grants, that have initiated a lot of really positive projects in the city. And it's important to bear in mind that without these consultants, you know, our ability to garner those grants by ourselves would be limited. What I do think that it pays to bear in mind and to outline in the contracts or whatever form these agreements take in January is deliverables. What is it that we're looking for? What is it that the consultant proposes to provide to us in the coming months? And I do think, Mr. Nichols, I understand that perhaps Delta's primary contract will be with RVT and not with the city. But certainly in January, I think that we would like to know exactly what services they will be performing for the city in the coming year. And it would seem to me that it might be appropriate. The city at this point has, you know, a handful of arrangements, sort of loose arrangements with RVT, if you will, the procurement position that's half city and half RVT. If we're sharing a consultant, it seems as though it might be wise maybe for us to execute some sort of an MOU or something like that, that outlines what the city is receiving, what RVT is receiving, who's contributing what, just so that we know exactly where we stand with that and what each of us is putting in and what each of us will hopefully get out. I have a couple of questions. One, you'd mentioned that, that part of Delta's services in the coming year would be proposed to be dealing with some of the remaining paperwork for the redevelopment and capital assistance program grants that we'd received for both Trade and Transit 2 and Bowman Field, correct?
Yes.
However, it was my impression at the time that we got the grant for Trade and Transit, for that project, that was predominantly an RVT project. Is that portion of, is administering that RACP funding then paid for by RVT, or is that something that falls under the Delta's
That's paid for by
responsibilities?
RVT.
Okay. Bowman Field, of course, is very much a city project, and it's not really benefiting RVT at all. I can understand that, but Trade and Transit 2 seems to me a little more of an RVT responsibility. And by the same token, Delta has been indispensable, it seems like, to RVT, and certainly has performed a lot of good things for the city, and so has Penn Strategies, but we've been talking a lot, especially vis-a-vis our insurance policies moving forward, about the fact that it is periodically a wise idea to put out an RFP and simply see who's out there. Is there a reason why we don't do that for planning and consultants?
Well, we have professional services, we have done that, but because of the synergies like Cumming College and how the projects are structured and their relationship with other entities, stakeholders, it's advantageous. And they've developed, and you've received the Connect Williamsport project. They've been instrumental.
And
once those projects are completed, I agree, but they've developed the East 3rd Street strategy, and RVT's carried the cost for all of that. So what we're suggesting is budget is the city just pick up a small part of that related to closing out the Bowman Field and the East 3rd Street project, however that advances. And like I said, since Delta is working with Cumming College as well, it just makes sense to continue the relationship until that project is finished. After that, yes, I agree, we would go out for an RFP for whatever the city needs are.
Yeah, it would be my suggestion. I understand, I don't think that we have any interest in kind of kicking Delta to the curb halfway through a project that they've really helped us bring this far. But I would say that, the city's needs change, consultant services change, we should be re-examining all of our consulting relationships at some point here in the near future when we've wrapped up some of the projects that our current consultants are involved with.
We would like to be able to do that, I agree. We're in midstream in several projects, so it wouldn't be advantageous for us to do that. We're also looking at the Park Avenue plan. In our discussions with Penn Strategies tonight, they spoke about the future, and we welcome the opportunity to meet with the ERC in regards to some of these responsibilities from both entities, Delta and also Penn Strategies. Penn Strategies just hired a grant writer that will help in some of these responsibilities, that we will give them additional responsibilities in regards to RCAP, so they will be able to administer some of those things as well. Speaking to Mr. Fitzgerald tonight, he has a meeting with the governor at the governor's mansion to talk about some of these projects, so they are very, very well connected with this governor's administration. So I think that it's going to be very, very beneficial for this year. But once again, to reiterate some of these comments, once we're finished with several of these projects, we're going to have many more to go, but at that point, I think we should put out RFP for those professional services. And we did, and actually, that will be discussed on Monday morning in regards to who we're going to choose for that consultant in regards to that plan. So we're taking one project at a time.
Right.
I think that's an excellent point. I would just observe that we had a consultant, one consultant that conducted the planning process for East 3rd, and then we moved to Delta without particularly an RFP process for the consulting for the remainder of the project. Like I said, I'm not by any means faulting, and we've had excellent services from all of our consultants. I'm not faulting it. I'm really saying that I think that, especially if we're moving forward with anything in the Park Avenue neighborhood, we should put out an RFP, not just for a consultant for the initial part of the planning, but we should be sure that we use an RFP process in future elements of planning and/or.
Sure.
It's simply a transparency thing that I think sends a positive message to both our partners in any project and to the various and sundry companies that might at some point want to serve the city and not have, had the opportunity to be involved.
And you have my commitment tonight. As I said, we've spoken to Penn Strategies about a half hour before this meeting, and we made it clear that we are not going to reduce that 75,000. They're going to be taking on additional responsibilities. So we're looking at possibly increasing that to $85,000. We will justify that when we speak to the ERC committee in regards to those responsibilities and the scope of work. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Noviello?
Mr. Mayor, if you don't mind, with regard to directing some of those discussions with respect to the Park Avenue project to the ERC, I'd like to see some of those discussions directed to the Housing Needs Committee as well. I know we're not addressing much in the way of housing needs on the East 3rd Street project, but I would think that the Park Avenue project would have some substantial room for housing opportunities.
Absolutely. Who is the chairman of Housing Needs? Okay.
I am, that's why.
Councilman Noviello, anytime you want to call a meeting, we'd be glad to sit down and talk, and we can have both consultants come in as well.
appreciate that.
So we can talk about federal funding and also state funding.
Thank you.
Sure.
And the issue about consultants, it's really, it depends on everybody's view of what consulting firms bring to the table. The graph is run. Council really had a preference for two. That was really more of a suggestion from council than the administration. So, it goes, I think everybody sometimes feels that they don't need an RFP because they feel a certain firm has the professional services or expertise that is needed.
And I think the Councilwoman Mealy was addressing having some definition in there. One thing I think we've gotten used to with Penn Strategies is a monthly report, and it keeps us updated. And so we haven't dealt with Delta. I don't know if they have a mechanism to do that, but I think we wouldn't have to necessarily be monthly, but regular intervals of reporting of what projects are being worked on and the progress that's being made on them. I think that.
No, especially if we have a little different arrangement next year, up to the advancement or to the going out for bid for Trading Transit 2, they were briefing council on a regular basis, because that was a complex project and very innovative in its financing. But yeah, I think that's a good suggestion. I think any consulting firm should have a regular discussion with council, so to speak.
Right. And Mr. Nichols, when you talked about closing out the RACP grants, is that purely just paperwork?
Oh, they come on site and they go through everything. Usually takes 2-3 days to go through that typical situation. Right now, just going through the Bowman Field, through the paperwork process and getting all the documents, we had to get a ton of documents from Phase 1 of Bowman Field, which was the project pre-RACP, which was the matching funds. So Delta had to pull all that information together because it wasn't pulled together. So they've been spending a tremendous amount of time advancing that project so we get our reimbursement. So
that was my question as well. I mean, the total financing hasn't come through yet, correct?
We've received, usually they retain 2% of the RACP grant once you get through all the paperwork, and which we have for trade and transit. We received about 98% of our dollars. Right now, we're still doing all that exercise for Bowman Field to get our first dollar. So, and again, Delta's helping take the lead on that.
Okay.
And we work with them daily trying to get this piece of paper, that piece of paper. I mean, it's
so closing out for one is
I'll
different.
be glad to provide you with what the requirements are.
Right.
I mean, it's something else.
Yeah, but I guess just for clarity, closing out for one entails getting substantial amount of money. Closing out for the other is ending it. Okay.
We're closing out on the one, and we're in the middle of getting our money on the second one right
Okay.
now, so.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from council?
Yeah.
Oh, Mr. Henry.
Just to kind of bring it back to my original dilemma, and actually it's not my dilemma, it's our dilemma as a city. I appreciate the projects, and I have no desire to see a project, stopped halfway through or slowed down or whatever. I have no desire to see that happen, but if we're so aggressive in developing and grabbing and reaching out and expanding that we don't have the money to provide for our own fire department or our own police department, so that if there's a fire downtown, these nice big buildings that we just built, and we can't get to them because we don't have the tools to do it, then we got a problem. So, the dilemma is for us to keep that balance, and you understand that. We all understand that, and so that's a struggle that I have right now as I'm looking to justify this. I feel kind of pinned because I know we're in the middle of these projects, but we're going to have expenses in the future for basic things, basic needs in the city, for basic services in the city. So I want to make sure that we're taking care of those basic needs as best we can. And obviously, you have that same interest, and I think we all do. But just to call us back to that bigger picture, and that's my reason for looking and searching and trying to find what I can find. I was looking at our maintenance, and I mentioned this in our last meeting about the maintenance line item for the fire department. And as I was looking at the numbers, the maintenance line item for this building right here is $40,000, but the line item for maintenance for 3 fire department buildings is $10,000. So, that's a problem, I think, and that's difficult. It puts us in a tough spot, to try to maintain what we have and take care of what we have. I think when we have a solid base to build on, then we can really expand. I am fearful that we are expanding without a solid foundation. And so these are some of the concerns that I have, some of the things that I mull over as I look at this budget. So I appreciate your help in explaining the necessity of these things, and I'll keep looking, because we have basic needs, basic services that we should be taking care of.
I agree 100%. That's why I've always advocate that developing a budget, passing a budget, doesn't need to say that's the end of the story.
Correct.
At the end of the year. It should be an ongoing discussion during the entire year. And I would strongly recommend, as we discussed before, the council maybe should do a strategic plan effort, because budgeting is becoming more and more difficult, and setting priorities is becoming more difficult. So, again, maybe there's a mechanism to keep a discussion about this ongoing throughout the whole year, so, it doesn't get lost when there's these priorities that are not funded, and they need to be addressed.
Ms. Mealy.
It does seem as though we don't, we have a vast number of needs within the city across many departments, of things that need to be, as Mr. Henderson points out, basically maintained, not improved upon,
Right.
but simply maintained at the standard at which they currently sit. And we do not have, we have occasionally sort of flirted with the concept, but we have never, to the best of my knowledge, compiled a sort of a master list that ranks those needs in terms of what's absolutely pressing and immediate, what's even more pressing and immediate, and what really has to be done right now. And so it becomes a bit of an issue, because it feels as though we're constantly say last year dealing with the fire department when they needed a breathing apparatus that was actually broken and we had to find a way to fund it immediately. And it's not as though that funding was out of our reach, it wasn't that expensive, but it does periodically, frankly, cost us a significant amount more money when we are borrowing money to fund a pumper truck instead of funding it out of the general fund, when we are borrowing funding for this, or when we are doing something on an emergency basis that we could have planned for and budgeted for and figured out ahead of time. And I would agree with you, Mr. Nichols, that this is something we only talk about at the end of the year, when none of us have perhaps the time to address it in the way that we would like to. I don't know exactly what process it is by which we make this a project of ours throughout the entire upcoming year, but I think a list of priorities in every department ranked in terms of what are our most pressing needs is something that we should have sort of across the city as a whole, not just department by department. And I also would agree, Mr. Henderson, that the solution to the city's budgetary woes is probably not to add to the number of things that we need to maintain on a regular basis. I would note in this case that at least with the East 3rd Street project and what we currently have funding for on East 3rd Street, we're not looking at any additional real estate perhaps that falls to the city to maintain. So we're looking at improvements that don't necessarily have a maintenance price tag further down the road. But I would also concur with you that we should perhaps at least consider sort of circling our wagons and trying to make sure that we're taking care of what we currently have and not adding to our responsibilities instead. But with the caveat that oftentimes what you can get funding for is the new stuff, not unfortunately the maintenance of the old things. So simply because we decide to stop seeking funding for new additions, for improvements to the city, because we can't fund maintenance isn't quite as simple as, putting money in X versus Y. It is, we were never going to get funding for maintenance in the fire department, but we may be able to get it for new streetscape in East 3rd Street. So it's not a zero-sum equation, or that might not be the term I'm looking for. But it's a really difficult decision and a really complex one. But I do think that one step we could make toward at least knowing what our needs are and beginning to look at potentially funding them is making a list of what our needs are across every department. And I'm not sure, I guess probably that falls best under either finance or public works in some way or another. But perhaps it's something that we should maybe look at as a joint project even between both committees in the upcoming year. That said, I think we do need to look at ways that we can find funding to improve the parts of our city that we can find funding to improve, even if that isn't necessarily meeting some of our most basic needs. So,
Public works and actually public safety.
yeah, that's true, public safety as well.
But I thought perhaps if we need a framework, we could possibly come up with that on finance that could be then filled in from the others.
Exactly.
And yeah, and it's interesting, the example you brought up about the money. It's kind of like with CDBG money. It can only be used in certain areas. If we don't use it there, we're not saving anything, and we can't use it somewhere else where there's other. And what we talk a lot about unfunded mandates that are put on us from the outside, but we really have our unfunded mandates within our own structure, because at some point you have to fix your roof, you have to replace vehicles, and so we really do need to look at that and to try to balance all that out with the revenue we have coming in. And like Councilwoman Mealy, her illustration about the East 3rd Street Gateway, we are making some of an investment there, and it is an expansion, but we're hopefully expecting that it's going to be an economic expansion that would help our tax base, which really is the foundation we need to to bring in those general funds that can be used to do the things that we're talking about. So but that means we need, as Mr. Nichols had said, we need a strategy, we need a strategic plan, so that when those things come to realization and that money comes in, we know where it's going to go. It's not going to be, oh, we have a pot of money, we can do this and do that. Then, if the income, if the revenues rise without raising taxes, and then we have a strategic plan, we know where to put that money, and it's going to be, it's going to be well spent because we thought about it and planned out. So there's a real synergy with all of these things we're talking about, and I'm hopeful and expectant that we're going to be able to work on those things in this coming year and really begin to get at least up to the curve, if not ahead of it, at this point, because we're behind it now all the time, it seems, as we go forward. Mr. Novella has...
Just a quick comment with respect to something along the lines of a 5-year plan. For those that are listening and watching, that wouldn't necessarily lock us into anything specific.
Not at all.
A 5-year plan is a projection, it's a forward look, it's an opportunity to see what we do have in front of us without the pressure of it being in our face at that particular moment. I'd also would assume that at the beginning of each year, at least at some given point in time, we would review where we stand at that time and ask ourselves if that once 5-year plan is still feasible and still, approachable, and how we're going to get those things accomplished. So it isn't as though we're going to lock ourselves into something that we're going to be unable to move over the next 5 years or so. So I've always thought that a 5-year plan is the best way to work. It allows us a little bit of breathing room when it comes to budget talks before the budget seasons as well. So
Yeah,
nice opportunity.
thank you. Councilwoman Neely?
And we definitely do engage in, to a certain extent, in some 5-year planning with the capital budget process annually, but perhaps not on the sort of specific level that might be required to really understand what our needs are. And we pointed this out in the budget sessions, but it probably bears pointing out once again that all of this discussion centers around a budget with a $2 million deficit, which is to say that when Mr. Henderson talks about trying to allocate some sort of funding for maintenance, we are still in the long run spending $2 million more with this year's budget than we're proposing to be able to take in. And what that means is that next year, even with a handful of modifications that we've made that will make the situation slightly better next year, we will still be in the hole, and we will have utilized a few get out of jail free cards, if you will, this year, like an exceptional healthcare surplus that will not be coming to us next year. So this year's budget process, which appears that it will leave us with no tax increase, will only make next year's budget process more difficult because we are spending without a view toward where we're going to get the funds to continue this level of spending next year. It's something that happens to a certain extent every year, and we begin to sound like doomsday prophets constantly saying there won't be any more money, but the truth of the matter is that at some point there won't be, and we will need to raise taxes, and it would be wise for us as a city to enter into a discussion not simply about what our needs are, our realistic needs are for every department moving forward, but also how we are going to meet those needs with a system of sustainable tax increases if that's what's necessary, so that we're not causing a severe sticker shock to our citizens here in Williamsport, and also what other ways we can possibly think of that could raise some serious revenue within the city. The East 3rd Street Gateway project will hopefully be one, but it's a number of small moving parts that might eventually add up to an increase in revenue for the city. It's not, unfortunately, one thing. It's not a big, sexy project. It's a number of small projects that raise our standard of living and raise our property values and make Williamsport a destination. So that is truly the matter that we all need to be examining moving forward, our needs and then also our possibilities. Okay.
I think that's a good point, Councilwoman Neely.
If I may, I just think East 3rd Street is a good example of how we do it right.
Right.
I mean, there was a commission, you got the public engaged, the city became engaged, city councils, ERC, we had studies with the help of our consultants, We were able to make the case to go before the foundation with the college and get them to approve $1 million, which is really all the local match that we need for all these grants, so there's no local general fund money needed. And, you know, I think at the end of the day, we're going to have a great project for the city of Williamsport, just like we had west of Market Street. So I think the levee project is advancing the same way. But, I mean, I think we ignore the operating side of things, and we always, things come up at the last minute, and the only choice we have is put it in the operating budget and raise taxes to fund it. So maybe we should approach the operating budget in the same way of taking really more of a far-sighted look at these things before they hit us, you know,
Sure.
in the head. So.
Absolutely. Any other comments or questions? I think we've, oh, Councilman.
Just to point out, thank you, just to point out the, I guess the other alternative, which nobody's comfortable with, but reducing the size of our government would pull us back into what we can afford, and that is the glaring truth. And while we are hopeful that our property values will increase and the tax base will increase and that type of thing, while we're hopeful for that, to base a budget on hope of that sort, I think is somewhat dangerous. These projects help with that hope, and they've got that goal in mind. But I think if we're going to sustain ourselves, at some point we've got to get serious about limiting the size of our government. And I know we feel like we're down to bare bones, but so is every taxpayer. And we've got to realize something's got to give, and it ought to be us before it's them. It ought to be the government before it's the taxpayer. That is what's giving and what's cutting. And so that's my take on that whole situation. And that sounds very negative. I usually am a very positive person. And so I'm sorry about that. But really, I think part of a 5-year plan has got to include some cuts, as uncomfortable as that is. I think that's just the fact. Thank you.
Mrs. Katz?
I have to agree with Councilman Henderson. You know, when you look at what the percentage of our budget is payroll and pensions, and eventually we're going to have to sit down with the hard facts of what's going on with payroll. It's interesting, every year at this time, we go through these conversations, and they're heartfelt, and it's like we've got to come up with plans. I think we've got to have these heartfelt conversations at least once a month to get down to the meat of everything. When we have our committee meetings, we're always discussing and approving resolutions of all the projects that are going on, but we have to get inside some of the things of what's going on in our city and discuss that more heartily every month instead of just at the committee meetings of what is being presented at council. And instead of waiting until the end of the year and looking at everything that's proposed budget-wise, because next year we're really going to have a really hard problem. We're really going to have to really get into the nitty-gritty this whole year of what are we going to do, because as Councilwoman Mealy said, we've got a deficit of $2 million. Next year, it's going to increase to maybe $4 million if things don't get better here of what we're going to do. I mean, we're using that word hope, 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 but hope doesn't bring in the money. You know, there's got to be solid plans of what we're going to do to bring in. And I would like to see more hearty discussions instead of just not voting on resolutions for things that we're doing. How, you know, I want to get into the meat of things. Are there places in City Hall that we can, you know, get into and dissect as far as what we're doing in it? And that's what I would like to see for this coming year.
Good point. I think, and it's not being negative to bring up the realities at all. I think, and we have talked about hope. I think some of the hope we've talked about, though, is based on actions we've already taken and development that is going forward. So there is a reasonable expectation that we're going to realize a return on the things that we've laid out. And another positive, I think, is we hired a city planner this year who has knowledge about moving and working in that area, and also an understanding of ways to market the city and some of the positives that we have and the kinds of things we're going to need to draw in the things we want to and the things that our populace needs, not just more retail, but family-sustaining jobs and all of those kinds of things. So we do have some concrete basis for, let's say, a positive realization, not just hope, as Councilman Henderson knows, has to be based on something. You have to have a level of faith that hope's going to be realized, and it has to be based on something substantial. And that's how it works. And I think there are some places that that we have that, and we need to focus on those, but look with a sharp, keen eye at the other areas that we've all talked about. So, well, we've had a good discussion. I don't know if there's anything more we want to add. So, we have a motion on the floor to adopt the operating budgets for the city, and I think we're ready to take a vote on that, Mrs. Frank.
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Noviello?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Henderson?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes. Thank you, Mrs. Frank. And then, since we've adopted that and only made a minor change, we can move on to item 6.
An ordinance?
The knitting line was up there, sorry, I just.
Was it a Penn State picture?
An ordinance of the City of Williamsport, County of Lycoming, and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania fixing the tax rate for all city purposes for the year 2018.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
There's a motion and a second. Thank you. Mr. Nichols?
Thank you. I simply, this ordinance on first reading sets the tax rate for 2018 at 14.72 mils, which translates to $14.72 per $1,000 of taxable real estate in the city of Williamsport. As indicated in the budget, this tax rate is expected to generate $12,865,169, which is net of anticipated LERTA abatements and considers a collection rate of 92%. So we ask for your approval of the ordinance on first reading.
Thank you, Mr. Nichols. I think we all understand what this is and how we got there. Are there any other comments and questions? We've talked about the tax rate and the taxes that we're bringing in. Anything to add to that? No? Mrs. Frank on the question, and then?
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Noviello?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Henderson?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes. Thank you, Mrs. Frank.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nichols.
And by the way, the planner said she would bring in $1 million of new revenue.
I know, so I was going to keep that a secret. That was
Just so you know that.
Item 16, except for filing the Controller's Report of October 2017, the Public Works Minutes of 10/10/17. Is there a motion?
So move.
Second.
Motion and a second. Questions, corrections, discussion? Hearing none. Mrs. Frank?
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Noviello?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Henderson?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes. Thank you, Mrs. Frank. Item 17, then, announcements. Our next regularly scheduled city council meeting will be next Thursday, December 14th, at 7:30 PM in city council chambers. Upcoming meetings, Monday, December 11th, at 12 PM, the Planning Commission, and 4 PM, Rec Commission. Tuesday, December 12th, 12 PM, Public Works, 3:30, Finance. Wednesday, December 13th, 11:30 a.m. Redevelopment Authority, 1 p.m. Bowman Field Commission in the Seckler Room, and 3:30 p.m. O&E Pension. Thursday, December 14th, 7:30 a.m. Leadership Lycoming, 7:30 p.m. City Council meeting, as we noted before. Any other comments or items to bring forward from council? Anything further from the administration? Yeah, yes. Chief Heckman.
Mr. Allison, members of council and administration, just want to make a quick announcement. As you all were aware of, this past Saturday on December 2nd, one of my guys, J.J. Lyons, and his family lost their house and all their belongings in a typical structure fire that J.J.'s used to going to. This time it was his house. The caring and the sharing, the family values, his church, the firefighters, everybody around the community has come together to help them and try and get them back on their feet again, and it's rolling along probably better than expected and quicker. I know JJ wants to get back to work as soon as he can. I'm there. We all want him back and their family back to some normal. Just want to make a mention. Next on Saturday, December 15th, from 4 to 8 at the Old Lake Cumming Township Fire Department. The fire department's the local is sponsoring a spaghetti dinner as a fundraiser for up there. So just to make a mention, if you know. This time of year, we sit around and we eat a lot. So another thing, we'll put pasta and meatballs in us, I guess. So it's again, it's 4 to 8. Adults $8 and children $6. Takeouts are available.
Chief, the 15th is a Friday, not a Saturday. Is that?
What was that?
The 15th is a Friday, not a Saturday.
Yes, it is the 15th.
Okay.
Okay. On that note, thank you. That is it.
Thank you, Chief. And send our best regards to. Thank you. Anything from the public tonight? They've all gone home. I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.